David, in other venues, you've said things like this: if a man writes a bad poem, it doesn't really hurt that many people. It's a bad poem. But because a great deal of architecture is public, bad architecture can really hurt people. And you've also said architecture is following the more popular arts down the same path of global nihilism and local despair that has given us, and he apologizes in advance, has given us hip-hop instead of music, graffiti instead of art, and Paris Hilton instead of Paris, France.
That is true, I did say that.
You did say that. I really appreciate that, and I think you've touched on it a little with Three River Stadium, and from a Christian perspective of seeing architecture as bringing flourishing into the world. When you create PNC Park, you get Jim Cable writing that it's got all these beautiful elements. Can you talk to us a little bit about the impact of bad architecture and reflect on what are you seeing in relation to the way the world's developing with regards to bad architecture and how that brings diminishing in contrast to good architecture and how that brings flourishing?
Well, here's the problem in a nutshell, Jay, is the architecture world is very close to just, right next door to the art world. And in terms of the curatorial set, the editors and the jurors and the tastemakers, the deans of architecture schools, they run with the same crowd as the art world set runs with. And so, if the art world for the last 100 years or so has been afraid of beauty and has been running away from it. And the problem is that the architects look to the art world for inspiration. And so they're running the same direction, which is away from beauty and towards alienation and despair as kind of the operative mechanism of design. And so you see all these, what we like to call starchitects, flying all over the world designing these buildings that, some of them look like, meteors that crashed into art museums, and you wonder how that came to be. Well, the reason it came to be is because these guys are following the art world where the art world is leading, and it's not leading to a happy place. And what I'm trying to do in my own little way is call attention to the fact and say, hey, wait, no, architecture's different from art. If you want to paint, a black canvas with, bleeding faces on it, that's fine because only a few people have to look at that, even if it's in a museum. But if you want to put your black canvas with bleeding faces on the corner and then put a CVS drugstore in the ground floor of it, that's a whole different thing. Mm-hmm. And, I have a problem with that, and I think as a profession, we should have a problem with that, and we should really try to understand more explicitly what beauty is and how to reinforce that in the built environment rather than just following the art world down this trail of tears.
Mm-hmm. Well said, well said. Many of us have recently read Andy Crouch's book, Culture Making. We've seen James Davison Hunter's book, How to Change the World. A lot of us have been affected by the worldview movement. And all of this is really saying what you believe matters, and there are implications to what you believe. But if you don't make anything, what you believe isn't going to have an impact. And in fact, what you make has to take root in community and then in institution, and it's going out farther and farther. You're really on the line all the time as an architect because you don't have the privilege of making something obscure that's never going to have impact. But I think that would give you the sensibility of being in touch with culture making on a broader level. Can you help us, those of us that are never going to make a stadium, can you help us to understand what can we do to have our view of the world that God wants to restore all things play out in everyday life?
Yeah, let me tell you a little story. There was, the University of Texas was going to do an art museum. and they hired a world-famous architect to do the art museum because they thought, well, you know, we're the University of Texas and we're pretty important, so we should have world-famous architects. So the world-famous architect did a design. They took it to the board of curators, and the darndest thing happened. The board turned it down, rejected a design by a world-famous architect because it didn't fit their worldview of the University of Texas and all that it stood for. And of course, the architectural world was, oh, you know, how can you reject this design by this world-famous architect, and you're going to go hire some Texas architect to do some horrible, you know, stucco thing with a red tile roof? And that may be, in fact, what they did. I don't know what the museum ended up looking like, but it was a scandal in the architectural world. And I say, good for the board of the University of Texas. And I wish that more architectural patrons had the nerve to stand up to their architects and say, this isn't very good. This isn't what we're really about. And I'll tell you what, architects are brilliant BS artists. I once heard an architect put up a picture of one of those, you know, metal and glass nightmares that, you know, is just the worst kind of building, and say, we believe that this building reflects the building traditions of the community in which it is located. And I just want to put my hand up and say, in what way does it reflect those traditions? Because to me, it looks like a sculpture that was done in the last 5 years. We got to be willing to call BS on our architects. We've got to be willing as patrons to say, no, that does not express our values as a community, as an institution, whatever it might be, as a business. And we've got to not fall for the architectural doublespeak when they put up an ugly building and say, this is beautiful. You've got to be willing to trust your gut enough to say, nah, that's not really working for me. Let's try something else.
It looks like the emperor's new clothes.
Very much like the emperor's new clothes. I think if, the architectural world operates on the same economy as the art world, which is if you can get enough people in black turtlenecks to say, it's marvelous. It doesn't matter if it's marvelous or not.
That's fantastic. What? I want to bring it down. I want to bring it down, though, even further down, because what if you're not bringing the kids to the museum? What if you're a stay-at-home mom and you are in charge of being the architect for your kids' souls? And what can the mom do? What can the guy who sits in the cubicle do? What can we do personally as stewards who God made to create in his image?
Well, I want to go back to that quote you mentioned earlier about, I can't remember exactly what it was, but, rearranging the elements of your domain to make life better for everybody. And whether you're a stay-at-home mom or a cubicle dweller, you have a domain, and you have the opportunity to rearrange the elements of your domain to make life better for everybody. And for some people, that just means putting wacky stuff in your cubicle, a collection of bobbleheads or a collection of snow globes. If you're a stay-at-home mom, it means taking responsibility for that domain that you have to, with the means that you have and the materials that you have, to make it as beautiful as you can. And that's a real realm of creativity for people to, some people are just so gifted at that, of, taking thrift store furniture and, bolts of fabric that they bought at, remnants, and, turning that into amazing environments. And we really all have that responsibility. As an architect, I have that responsibility in my work, but as a stay-at-home mom, you have that responsibility in your home to do the same thing.
It's fantastic. What we're hearing as a theme all through this day is that when we do good work, when we do work that's integrated with all of our life, it's work that lasts forever.